Hey all, welcome to The Home We Build, where we aspire to be a movement of men who build their lives on a firm foundation. Today, I'm joined on the podcast by my father, Jeff Saueressig, as we talk about Christmas traditions and what Christmas means to us. Let's get going. The Home We Build. One little caveat before we get going here today. I am working with a new recording software to bring my father onto the podcast. And unfortunately, as I finished up recording with him, we realized that for some odd reason, the video was not captured. So I apologize today. We won't have video, but it will be audio only, and I've got some visuals that'll be up on the screen. Um, but going forward, I hope you enjoy this conversation talking about Christmas. All right, so I am here with my dad, Jeff Saueressig, and we've obviously been talking about traditions here today and the value of those. And growing up, my family had a lot of different kinds of traditions, and we'll talk about a few of those today. But I wanted to just say, hey, we're going to talk about this. It's where a lot of my best memories come from, and so we're going to jump right in here. And kind of the first topic that I wanted to talk about with you, Dad, was what is the value of tradition, and what has the value of tradition been for you?
Hmm. Yeah. Well, thanks, Nathan. When I think about this topic, I probably some of this came from my own family background and upbringing as well. And, I have some good memories and had the blessing of being raised in families where there were traditions. And I probably am a bit of a sentimental sort. So, traditions
So
have
that's where I
been
get it
some,
from.
probably, yeah. Um, and, it's, so I, I have looked at traditions, and when I think about traditions, to me, there's a lot of different types of traditions, and, they serve different purposes. But if I really were to try to distill that down, to me, there's value in two big areas. And, traditions, I
Hmm.
think, have a real spiritual value and element to them. And I also think um, traditions have a, very good family value or family element and family value to them as well. So,
Hmm.
I would think of this, this topic as having kind of two buckets of focus. One would be the
Okay.
spiritual value of traditions, and then maybe the family value of traditions. Um, and so if I think about the spiritual value of them, those are things that can exhibit themselves in different ways, and there are different kinds of spiritual traditions. Um, in the
Hmm.
family, those could have been simple things like growing up. You know, we before we went to bed, you know, we had a tradition of my parents praying. You know, alongside the
Right.
bed
Right.
with me as a youngster, and so that was something that developed a bit of a a tradition, and that was instilling some of the very spiritual foundations in me. Um, when I was a young child, and that's I'll say a simple thing, but it was a meaningful thing, and it's planting those seeds and building that foundation. Um, but it can be bigger things than that as well. And so, the tradition of going to church on a Sunday, Sunday was a day of worship and a day of,
Hmm.
it was a Sabbath day. And so you went to church that day, and you did, not that I always did this, but, it was generally more of a day of rest. And, so that tradition of kind of
Yeah.
honoring the Sabbath day was, a bit of a tradition, I'll call it. But it was also helping to build some of those
Right.
spiritual foundations. Um, and every family is probably different, but that's, you find those things through the course of your years, and, through your being young, and then, some of those things are things that I could think about when I became a husband and a father. What sorts of traditions might
Yeah.
we want to have in our family that could help nurture the spiritual foundations in our own family.
I think I might add to that too is I looking back on traditions over the years that it's lent itself to honing in on the things that are most important too, whether it's praying at going before going to bed, or church on Sunday, or your candlelight services on Christmas. Obviously, we're talking about Christmas here this week too, and or Easter services. Like, not that you don't do these spiritual practices throughout the year, but having traditions built around those things really
Around special
creates an
spiritual events,
environment.
certainly.
Yeah, it
Yes.
creates an environment to kind of hone in and focus on those things that's comfortable, and it makes focusing on it a lot easier too.
Yeah. Yeah. So, some of those traditions in my family upbringing certainly were around holidays, Easter and Christmas, Thanksgiving. Each of those, were very big, um, traditions in my family, my formative years of growing up. And, those are definitely some things that carried through, and influenced me as a dad, um, to try to bring those some traditions around those special days and spiritual days, in our own family.
Yeah,
Uh, the other part of it I mentioned is about, the family value and
yeah. I
I
was going to
think,
ask you about that.
I think traditions really are helpful in creating unity in the family. They're the things that create memories that help bind us together, kind of make
Right.
the family relationship itself stronger. Uh, it in some ways creates a family legacy that, each family member can carry with them, and then, may or may not carry forward then from, even in some cases, can go from generation to generation. Some things are, some traditions are, I think, are very unique to a single family unit, but I know that there are some things that, um, carried
Yeah.
from my grandparents, even to my parents, and now to me, and maybe to that generation, and maybe the next.
I,
Things like family
I,
recipes are a simple one where, there's just certain,
yeah, that's I hadn't thought about that one actually. That's a good one.
we have we've had a special cheesecake that, was a recipe from, I think, from my grandma. And my mom was one who was really able to make it, and it became a tradition in our house when growing up. My mom just made a great cheesecake. And that's kind of I'm not much of a cook, but for anybody who is, at least the recipe that my mom had a little special touch to it. There were some tips and tricks to make it turn out just right. And, as it carried forward, it wasn't always able to be passed along to everybody, because not everybody could kind of perfect the recipe, just making that special cheesecake. My wife, your mom, was one who happened to, be able to perfect that recipe, and so it kind of carried into our family. And, we've
Hmm.
had quite a few good cheesecakes over the years, and I'll say you have been one who's been able to kind of grab that, develop the culinary skills to perfect that recipe. So that's one a good example of kind of where it's
It takes some
carried
practice,
through
that's for sure.
several generations now, and that it's a great family legacy to be able to pass along.
Yeah, yeah. In that vein, then I guess it kind of leads into my next question, anyways, because I was gonna ask what, and I'd be curious to hear if you had any, maybe you don't, but anything off the top of your head that was, what was your like your favorite tradition growing up, and then maybe like something that you had later on in life, but anything, maybe there's something in there too where it's aside from a recipe has been handed down from generation to generation that, for all I know, I don't even realize it's coming from a different generation.
Hmm. Yeah, well, I growing up, I had touched just a little bit on, some of the traditions that we had in our family around the holidays, and I think for me, there were three big holidays that just kind of always really stuck out, and that was Easter, Thanksgiving, and Christmas. And those three holidays were ones that we tended to celebrate pretty formally, probably as I think about it compared to today. They were pretty formal holidays for us, and those were really good memories for me because it was a time that we were always together as a family, and for many many years, every year at those holidays, both sets of my grandparents were living when I was growing up, and so we would have both sets of my grandparents would always be at the table with us, and my mom would have a formal dinner, and it would be in the dining room, and everybody would be gathered there, and it was just a time of good family time together, good conversations, lots of fun and joking. I can remember my two grandpas, tended to be a little bit political, so everyone's not every year, but sometimes there might be some spirited conversations around political topics of the day. Um, those,
We call those moments of intense fellowship.
yes, a few of them were fairly intense. Um, and, my grandmas sometimes would have to tell my grandpas to say, that's probably enough on that topic, because those two would have little differences of opinion, probably not all that dissimilar to what might happen in the family dynamic uh, today. Um, but they always ended on a happy note, and
Right.
everybody was just had a good time together, um, and just spending it we'd have a fire in our living room or next to the dining room, and just spend the day together. So those were just great traditions, in our
Hmm.
family, those holidays. The other one that really comes to my mind in terms of growing up, uh, that's probably had a big influence on my life here is when you hear it, you'll probably understand that. But we took our family vacation, typically growing up, was um, taking a fishing trip, and this would happen right after school ended. So my dad was a teacher, and so
Okay.
about the first week in June, after school was done, he was so glad the school year was over, and we would have a family trip, and we would drive up to northern Wisconsin, and we stayed on a certain lake almost every year for those many early years, and we did a fishing
I
trip
forgot
up
about
there.
that.
And those were some of my best memories. Um, growing up, it was
Yeah.
so anxious to be able to go fishing. It was the first, my first fishing experiences were up in northern Wisconsin, and they just were great, great memories. And it probably instilled in me a love of fishing that I still have today. And try to get out. Probably
Yeah.
not as much as I'd like to, but I get out and still enjoy fishing a lot today because of that.
Yeah, when
Uh,
did you have one from later on in life? I mean, otherwise, I
oh,
had one that I obviously would, as our family has grown over the years, with me, Brandon, and Rachel, and you and Mom. Like, there's one that stands out in my mind, but I'd be curious to hear if it's the same one that you're thinking
yeah.
of.
Well, to me, there were a number of them that were very noteworthy for in my mind, and were part of cherished family memories. Um, I think of early on uh, when you kids were very young. We did. Uh, Mom and I would have a routine of sometime during the course of the year, usually in the fall, winter time, we would take a long weekend to some hotel, and we would, just get away for a weekend. There'd be a swimming pool, and that you guys were just little tykes, and but it was always fun to take you there, and that, kind of one year then, and we would go to different hotels around the state, and it was good fun. But one year we decided, because we had family down in Florida, we decided instead of going to the hotel, we were going to actually take a trip down to Florida to visit our
Okay.
family down there.
Hmm.
And we did that one year, and this is interesting because what I think was the start of a tradition kind of evolved into something different then, but became even a stronger tradition because the first year
Unknown
after we
caller.
went to that trip down to Florida, the first year, we came back and I think everybody had so much fun. There's like, we have got to do this again. And so we
Did we
didn't.
drive that first year, or did we fly that first year? 'Cause I know we
No.
flew like
Oh,
twice.
yeah. I think the very first year, maybe we did drive. Or, I mean, sorry, I think we flew the very first time we went down. I
Back
think.
when Midwest Airlines was still a thing.
Yeah, yeah. And we didn't go. We were going kind of every other year. I think maybe two
Hmm.
years later.
That sounds
I
right.
think then I think we drove down. And the second time we went down, we had such a great time. It was the tradition evolved again to say we have to go every year. We have to find a way to go down every year. And I think after that, we ended up making that an annual trip.
Yeah.
And because it was, everybody enjoyed it so much to be with the family down there that lived down there, and we had some cousins that happened to be your age, so you guys had a great
Hmm.
time playing with the cousins, and of course going to the warm weather was great, and even out of that experience, then some other little traditions developed. So I think about the goodness of that tradition, but to the extent that we enjoyed it so much, there was so much anticipation that would come before us venturing down because eventually we settled on, because you guys were in school and mom worked at school, we said, well, we could just do this on spring break. And the anticipation of that
Right.
became so great. We created, shortly after Christmas, after the new year, somebody decided, we should make a paper chain with each link in the chain representing one day. And so I don't know, maybe in February or January even, the kids got so excited they made this paper chain and had, 60 links in it. And every day that hung on the fireplace, and one of the paper links chains would come off, and it was our countdown to how many more days did we have before our trip to Florida. So that became a tradition. So sometimes
I can't.
traditions
I
evoke
I
more
can't remember how that
traditions.
came about.
I
Right.
don't remember either, but I mean, we did that for many years then because it was like, oh man, only 13 more days before we got to go. And the chain
Well,
kept
and that
getting a little shorter.
that whole trip is the reason why whenever we have an opportunity as a family, we spend time in the hot tub too and hang out because that just
That, that's
became a
right.
part of that. That was a small tradition that kind of came out of that whole thing.
Yeah.
Um,
So it's interesting to think about how traditions come about. I mean, they
hmm
largely, I think, because they come about because of shared experiences that people really enjoy. And it's this kind of organic activity or organic dynamic where you do something, and because it was enjoyed so much by those who are you have a close relationship to, you want to do it again, and all of a sudden, then over time, you develop it just evolves into becoming a tradition, and
right, right,
it's an interesting dynamic how that works.
yeah.
Um, you
Um,
know, I got one other one, but I don't want to. If you got some other question,
well, yeah, I was going to say the one I do want to move on to the next question, but I was going to the one that stuck out in my mind that when I hear the word tradition, that's the first thing that pops into my head was our, and I'm not going to sit there here and explain every detail of it for our audience, but our traditions around picking out a Christmas tree or was
yes,
is that one always just when I hear the word tradition, that's the thing that sticks
right.
out for me because it's such an
No, I
obscure thing that we always did, and for the audience, I mean, it's sometime in early fall, usually September or October, we would go up to this tree farm, and my mom would bring caramel apples and hot apple cider, and we'd bring a football and some frisbees, and the tree farm was sitting on I don't know what 50 acres, 60 acres or something like that, and you went and you picked out a tree on the lot and you tagged it and you pick it up later, but that just became a afternoon day of goofing around in the back 40 of this guy's property because it was just
have
what
to
we
have
did.
our
And
milkweed pod fights. And,
yeah, there's a plant called milkweed that brings these little pods that have all these little seeds in them, and we'd pick them and we'd literally just throw them at each other and we'd call it our milkweed pod fights. It's just goofy,
just
stupid
goofy
stuff, but
things that became
it's
little
just
traditions.
fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
And the other part of that that I always remember then is at Thanksgiving, then we would on that Thanksgiving weekend we would became a tradition that we would go up to. Uh, so we went to a place called the Osthoff that was about an hour
yeah,
north
yeah.
of where we lived, and after that weekend, a couple days there, we would always go and pick up our Christmas tree and then we'd bring it home. And that would be kind of the transition from Thanksgiving to Christmas. And one of the things that we just, was probably my over exuberance on the, picking out Christmas trees, but it always turned out that the tree we picked in the field always was far bigger. It looked a lot smaller in the field than it did than when we got it to the house. And so part of our tradition around bringing our Christmas tree home involved trying to actually get it into the house. And we had a couple of them, unfortunately, that were so large. It took everybody in the family to grab a hold of it, get it through our patio doors. It was like birthing a baby, literally trying to bring that
Well,
huge Christmas tree into the house and get it set up. And
it's
uh,
funny that comes up because mom just texted me, and you might have been on that thread. I don't know if you were, but a picture of one of our trees from like 10 years ago or something like
oh,
that. And
one of the
I'll have to flash
most
that up on the screen
enormous.
here it's just an absurd sized tree that we would get every year. It was it was like trying to get it through that screen door. I mean, we would get cardboard just to try to get it to slide better, and we're not ripping
Yeah.
the screen door off the house. And it was a
But just
task to bring
having
that in.
a big live Christmas tree in the house at that time of the year and then getting it decorated was just I think it was just what a wonderful
Yeah.
tradition, and just something that really we have great memories from, and was just part of the joy of that season. You
Yeah. So have you I don't know. I mean, for me, traditions are so helpful in working through relaxation and being able to adapt. So and this is just me. I when I get off of work on a trip, usually, at least in the last couple of years, it takes me 2 3 days just to even decompress, and then like now I can actually enjoy the vacation. And by that time, if I've got a week off, I might not start feeling like I'm on vacation until Tuesday. Now I've got 3 days, and I'm having to already start thinking about, well, what do I got going on when I get back home, I have found that tradition helps in pulling getting me to decompress faster. Um, like when we went on a Alicia and I went on a trip here 2 3 months ago. We went out west on and it was a 2 week road trip. Which by the time I get done with 2 weeks, I'm like, okay, I'm ready to go back to work. What's your experience been in that regard?
I can share in that sentiment about, you know, through my working years and so on of raising family and having career and so on. It was always difficult for me to shut off and find some times to relax, and slow down. And I found one of the great anticipations on the traditions around vacations in particular being those. Some of the great anticipation for me was knowing that I probably this was going to be a chance to shut down and to be able to disconnect. And was always I mean, a great time to be able to recharge the battery, so to speak, and come out of a week's vacation. Um, and for me, yeah, I oftentimes, unfortunately, if I only had a day or two off, it wasn't long enough for me to really feel like I had recharged. But a week, during a week's vacation, I could get to the point where I had totally disengaged, shut down, and found that to be incredibly refreshing. And coming back to say, hey, my battery's been recharged, and now I can, my knife's sharp again, and I can get after it and feel like I can go attack and,
Yeah,
not be burnt out. So that is definitely for me, it was a big value in some of those vacation traditions that we had.
yeah, yeah. I would agree with that because and just thinking about like the spring break one, that was always from January through March was always a season where you just didn't get time off really, and having that countdown clock always made engaging in vacation a lot easier. Um,
You know, you know,
and I think you're right; it does apply probably more to vacation than it does to anything else.
you know, but I find it depends upon the event too. It can be a shorter event, but if it's very, very different environment, a whole different experience, I have discovered some scenarios where being able to relax even after kind of disengage even within a day or two can still be refreshing for sure.
All right, so switching gears here just a little bit. We're gonna jump back and forth between one, this topic or Christmas a little bit. Um, Before we jump into anything super serious about Christmas, do you have a particular favorite Christmas story from over the years, or favorite Christmas memory that you've had from years gone by?
Yeah, I mean, Christmas, I talked to you about it as being one of those, great holidays growing up. But for us, in our own family, to me, Christmas was one of the highlights of the year. And I think, we had quite a few traditions, I'll say, around Christmas. And it kind of started, as we talked about, with bringing the Christmas tree home and getting that decorated and so on. But, then, the days, the actual holidays of, Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, became, I'll say, rather traditional. There were a lot of things about that, some bigger and some small, that became pretty traditional. And for us as a family, we often, almost every year, we would go to church and there was a candlelight service that we
Mhm.
attended on Christmas Eve. And following that, then we came home and we would have a light meal, I'll call it, um, but it became a fairly traditional meal in a sense, in that it was just a variety of small finger foods and snacky kinds of food items, not a big sit
Right.
down
Right.
dinner, but there were just certain types of food that became a necessary part of that meal, and that became kind of a traditional meal. Probably I'll say the most noteworthy one, was the idea of having, you know, what we call raw beef and onions sandwiches, and that
Could be a
was,
foreign concept to most
right.
people.
Some people might call that, steak tartare, or there's wildcat. I mean, people have different names for that. But, it was a raw beef and onion sandwich. Um, we've had people who've have come into our family who have been a little shocked and surprised by that, and maybe some have been interested in trying it. Some people are amused or bewildered at why you would even want that, but that was just a tradition for me growing up, and kind of introduced it into our family.
Hmm.
And as it turned out, everybody in our family really liked it, and so it just became part of that traditional meal on Christmas Eve. And
Did I ever tell you I got Alicia's dad and brother to try that?
oh,
Yeah,
really?
one
Oh,
of the
that's
first kind of
interesting.
thing, the first Christmas that I met Alicia, I got them to try that, and they both were kind of like, hmm, it's not as bad as I thought it'd be, but it's not like they'd go back for seconds, and it was like, huh, that's actually pretty good.
Well, they were probably actually braver souls than most people, because a fair number of people over the years who we've tried to introduce to it is like, I don't even dare to try it. So that was good for them.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah.
I
So
was thinking about
what?
that meal in my noteworthy stack of crackers too. We'd always
Yeah,
we'd always have
we
cheese and
have.
crackers, and it kind of became an inside joke that just went die because I this is an aside. We'd have cheese and crackers at it, and one of the early years on, I took a stack that was just like it was like a whole sleeve of crackers almost, and
I think
I
your
got to
eyes
the
were a
end of
little
my
bit bigger
meal.
than your stomach.
Well, it was that, but I got to the end of my meal and I didn't have anything else to eat with them, and it was kind of like my mouth just got so dry. I'm like, I can't eat any more crackers.
Well, if I remember correctly, there would be a little bit of eating competition between you and your brother.
Well,
That
and you too.
probably inspired a little bit of that. So, yeah. But Christmas Day, then we all always kind of had a tradition then too of just being able to. We'd get up and have probably a brunch in those mid-morning hours, and then everybody would get pretty. The kids would get pretty anxious about being able to open some gifts, and we would spend the afternoon really just together as a family. Um, have a fire and just would open our gifts and spend time together. And that was always just to me was just a great family time, and being being together
Kid,
for that whole day.
I'm going to ask a question that's not on our list because I'm actually kind of curious about this. What Very early on, we always did our like we did Christmas presents on Christmas Eve, and then what drove the switch? Because eventually we switched to doing it on Christmas Day, and I don't remember how that. It almost feels to me like it happened when we moved, but maybe
Mm,
I'm It seemed like it happened around that time, but I don't remember what drove that switch.
No, I think it was actually a rather a practical matter at one point, because I think that Mom and I, we got to Christmas Eve and didn't have all the Christmas presents wrapped. So it's like, well, we're going to do a game time decision and say, this year we're going to change it up and we're going to actually open the presents on Christmas Day.
It was a very
So,
practical decision. I
and,
didn't know that.
and having that happen once, then it was like, well, that actually worked pretty well. And gives us a little bit of buffer if we need it. And so why don't we just kind of switch over to that? So
Huh.
probably it all worked out well, I think, in the long run. Eventually we started out with having two options, either Christmas Eve or Christmas Day for gift opening, but because of the logistics of it, we ended up landing on Christmas Day.
Hmm. I
So
did not
I'm
know
not
that.
sure there was
That's
any
too funny.
profound reason for it. It was a practical matter one year.
Fair enough. um, so I kind of blending the two topics a little bit here, and then this question is more rooted um, at the what's the word I'm looking for? Um, at the title of this segment that I have on the podcast that I'm going to be going forward, which is passing the baton. And the idea around this segment, and as I said earlier in the intro, is it's an opportunity to talk to individuals who are specifically for this podcast being focused more on younger men. This is an opportunity to talk with someone who's further on in life and has more experience and can provide some insight to young men. My question would be, how might a young couple go about starting to kind of cultivate some traditions as whether they're engaged in heading into marriage or they've been in marriage for a couple years and they really have a anything in particular they do on a regular basis? Is there anything you might say that would, or any advice you might give that would help young couples do such a thing?
Hmm. Well, I think about, how do traditions come about even? And, I mentioned earlier that it is interesting how it is a fairly organic process. And things that you do that you don't even anticipate um, suddenly end up becoming traditions. And I think about how and why does that happen? And I think that there's a aspect of um, you know not overthinking it at all, because you can't force traditions. They come about organically, but they oftentimes will start as simple things. And if there's an intention around you know wanting to do something, let's say if you start as a couple, it's going to be something as a husband and wife. And you know when I think back on the years before mom and I, your mom and I had kids, we did some simple things back then that kind of became traditions. Like, we would go, and back in the day, we'd go out every once in a while, and we would go to a place that had served pie, and we'd go out for a night and have a piece of pie and coffee. And when we did that, that was something that we both enjoyed. Mom certainly enjoyed that, and it was a
Hmm.
time for us to talk about the future. And for whatever reason, those conversations that we'd have there would be like, well, this was early in our marriage, and those would be kinds of times for dreaming about, well, what about this? What might this look like? When might we want to have kids? Are we thinking about, wanting to get a house? What would that look like? And it would be that time of dreaming, but it became a time that we enjoyed together. We both enjoyed the experience and found that while we had no idea the first time we did it, because we enjoyed it and we both shared in it, and derived joy out of it, it became something we wanted to do more often. And
Hmm.
when you do it more often, it then lays the potential for something to become a tradition. Now, that was an example of one where it wasn't a long-term tradition that spanned our entire lives and now is being passed along from generation to generation, but was just a simple thing that we both enjoyed doing together that kind of brought us together. And out of that, then we observed it and were a little bit intentional about, oh, well, that was good. Why, let's do it again. And then began to evolve into that. So, I guess I think about it and say, for some young
Hmm.
couple, find something that you like to do together and do it and explore that. And you may just find that all of a sudden, that was really good. And we should do that again. And when you become a little bit intentional about that, it then it can be this very simple thing, or as we kind of talked about a few of these stories, all of a sudden it morphs into something bigger. And maybe other traditions spawn off of that. And then tradition really is a matter of time. Traditions develop over time, they just don't develop overnight. And they don't develop by doing it once. It becomes a
Right.
repeated activity, and um,
Right.
so I would just offer a young couple to say, find something simple and just do it, and do something that you enjoy together. And if you're in tune with the idea of traditions, you'll begin to find some of those things that, wow, that was fun. That was really good. We should do that again. And you're laying the
Right.
groundwork for creating a tradition. Um,
Do you
I
think
think about, oh,
that?
sorry, go ahead.
Oh, so I was going to say, do you think that it? How do I put this? To me, it would seem, just based on what you're saying, is and specifically is to find some things you like doing together around specific events too, potentially. Um,
Yeah, it can be
Experiment
certainly
the first
around.
couple years with Christmas and figure out what it is that you like doing.
I mean, those are some natural ones where it just lends themselves to traditions. But now that, because I'm older and seen all my kids, are adults and, have now got spouses. And so they're, cultivating these same things in their relationships. As I think about, your brother Brandon and his wife, they have a tradition, something now that's become quite a tradition for them. I think they would call it a tradition, and it developed, though, out of their wedding. So they happened to go to a place up in Idaho for their honeymoon,
Mm,
and they enjoyed that so much that now that is something that has kind of become a tradition for them around their anniversary. That every year on their anniversary,
yeah,
right around
that's
their
true.
anniversary, they go up and they go to the same place where they spent their honeymoon. So, I mean, that was something that mom and I didn't have, is, a moment or an event, a milestone event in our life. We didn't have any traditions around that, but everybody finds their own things. And
Right.
so there's an example of, wow, that worked for them. They, it obviously was a memorable experience for them, so much so that they wanted to do it the next year and the next. And,
Right.
now it's become a tradition. So you can't
Right.
predict these things, but you can just move in directions and be open and intentional about some things. And before you know it, all of a sudden you've got an activity that's really resonating with you and your wife, or, in later years with you and your wife and your kids, your family. I mean, I could see
Hmm.
that for you guys. The one thing that I have observed with you and Alicia, and it's maybe at the early stages, but I have observed that a couple of the trips, I'll call them camping trips, but the combination of camping with the fishing that you've done along the way on those couple of trips seems like you guys, both of you, have really enjoyed those. And we've gotten, Mom and I
Hmm.
have gotten that feedback just based on the videos you've sent us and the text and so on of you talking about those experiences. And I can see, we can just see on
Yeah.
the video that, I remember Alicia sending a video of you catching a fish, having it on, and you were fighting it, and you both were excited about it. And, I could see that experience being one that seems to have resonate with both of you, and something there out of those experiences might become a tradition in your family. I don't know. It's probably too soon to tell, but
Yeah.
we can see those things in our kids, and that brings us joy to know that those are things that are building unity between you and your spouse, and you and those foundational pillars that make for a strong relationship.
So my last question, and then more or less just if you want to share anything else. So the last question I have: what does Christmas mean to you? And then if you have anything else you want to share after that, by all means, please do. We're all here to listen.
Yeah, well, I mean, Christmas for me has been a very special time of the year. Um, as a believer, to me, it's one of the holiest times of the year. Um, it's the meaning of Christmas, and it, in our culture and society, it's, unfortunately, there's a lot of noise and distraction around what the actual meaning of Christmas is, and it's, I would be probably wouldn't be truthful if I said over the years that some of those distractions and things, have gotten in the way for me as well of, being able to actually celebrate Christmas um, for the actual meaning of Christmas, and to put some of the, noise and distractions aside. But, at the end of the day, Christmas is, you know, represents to me, a, a tremendous display of how God, you know, is a God of relationships, and, wants to have a relationship with each one of us. And, that is displayed through what happened at Christmas, where, God literally was incarnated into human form through the person of Jesus Christ. And, through Christ being on earth, I mean, it talks about in John, the Word became flesh and he dwelt among us.
Hmm.
He took that human experience with all of the joy, the suffering, the pain, the fun, all of the same experiences that we all have in life. That was a gift that God gave us because He wanted a relationship with us. And through Christ being here, and then even more dying for us, was the ultimate gift that we could have for all
Hmm.
of us who don't deserve any of it. And, so for me, it's really just, it's one of the great displays of understanding who God is. And God is a God of love and wanting a relationship for us. I also
Yeah.
think, it also reaffirms, that through Scripture and what Scripture tells us, especially the prophecies of, being fulfilled through Jesus being incarnate and coming to this earth. That, in Isaiah it talks about, a virgin would have a son, and his son would be called Emmanuel, which means
Hmm.
God is with us. I mean, that is literally God having a direct relationship with us. That's a very powerful um, and very, very moving um, you know, understanding of what Christmas
Hmm.
really means to me.
Yeah. You said something earlier, a little bit that resonates with me because it's something I think I've been learning a lot, specifically this year, is and just realizing I need to hear it almost daily, is that am I am and every person in this world is a fallen sinner. And the fact that God would take the time to spend time with us and to do it for come here for us is such a miracle, just from the sheer standpoint of how sinful we all are. And that is such a blessing.
And
um
when we, despite the fact that we don't deserve any of it, He gives us, express that ultimate gift of love to us. Um, it gets lost, I think, in some of this is, the Gospels mean good news, and when you think about what God did there for us as humans, that is great news for us.
mhm.
We have been, we have a Savior. We have been saved from our sinful nature, and not because we deserve it at all, but it's a gift. I mean, that is good news, and that's why I guess
Mhm.
for believers we can have that joy in knowing that, because that is a gift, a true gift there of love. I guess one
um
other thing I think about a little
well,
bit is going
or
back to,
go ahead.
going
Mhm.
just one last thing I think about, the conversations we had about traditions, and I think about, Christmas and traditions, and there are some of those go together, but at the end of the day, that intertwining, there's a big intertwining, I think, between traditions and Christmas. And we talked about what Christmas means, and it's that expression of God's desire to have a relationship with us. And you know everything we kind of talked about with traditions really is about kind of the manifestation of how we have relationships with each other, because traditions are almost always
Yeah.
related to things that we do that we cherish with family or friends that create these cherished moments and these memories. And it's those relationships that get strengthened through those events, through those traditions. And so,
Yeah.
to me, traditions is a kind of just almost a manifestation of what Christmas is.
Mhm.
It's God's way of us as humans being able to interact and have very deep relationships in the same way that God wants those relationships with us. So I see those two things really point together in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Oh, that's an interesting observation. Because yeah, traditions, and I think of like the last few years now. Well, so I mean, since I moved to Texas, and it's kind of evolved, but almost every 4th of July that I've lived here in Texas, I have ended up out on Lake Louisville with friends
Mm,
for the day.
mm,
And initially that was with Uncle Paul and a couple of buddies and stuff like that. And then the last 2 years it's been with a bunch of friends from church and some of Alicia's coworkers. And it's it's been such a fun thing to do every year because it is a means of setting some time apart to actually have fellowship with others and to see that, to build those relationships. And to it's interesting that God puts those fence posts or whatever you want to call them in the Bible of, or those markers in the Bible of, here are things you need to celebrate. And you look back in the Old Testament and like Numbers and Leviticus, and that they had, I think there was like 3 or 4 festivals. They had that they obviously had the Passover, and then the Festival of Tabernacles, and like a harvest festival or something. I forget. There was 3 or 4 of them every year that they were supposed to observe, and that was by God's design as a means of building relationships with each other, but also honoring God in that. And to when we go into the New Testament to see obviously Easter, and then I well, I don't think it was so quite so explicit in the Gospels, where it's like you should be celebrating my birth, but
but if you
seeing
think
some of
about
these
communion as an example,
communions,
yeah,
another one where, and it's interesting to think about how God actually designs it such that we have tradition things that we do as and it's not just a means of communing with each other, but also communing with Him and honoring Him
yeah,
in those seasons of life.
yeah. So those two things in a lot of ways go together. You know.
Yeah, yeah.
Sounds
Was there
sounds
any?
like you've got the makings of a little tradition on Fourth of July.
Yeah, yeah. That's well, we'll see. I mean, Alicia and I have been talking about it here. This year, it's going to be challenging with the girls on the way in the early year. I mean, it won't be on the 4th of July. I can assure you of that if it happens, because
Yeah,
we'll
yeah,
need childcare, and that won't happen on the Fourth of
yeah.
July.
That's probably true.
But
Yeah.
was there anything else that you had any other thoughts that you wanted to share here today?
Mm, I don't know. I think that, to me, that as I thought about this, that, the relationship there between traditions and Christmas and God's relationship with us, to me, was really it was something that probably I, you know, gained a little bit of a greater appreciation for too.
Hmm.
So it was a good conversation.
Yeah. Well, cool. Well, thank you so much for taking. I know you're a busy guy. Thank you for taking the time to sit and record this. And I think if all goes well, we may very well be doing another one someday down the road. But
Oh,
um, I I appreciate the time.
I'm, if if my son wants to talk to me, I'm always happy to have a conversation. So
Absolutely.
it was enjoyable. Thanks.
Yeah, it was. Thanks. Well, I hope that was enjoyable and that was insightful for you. I appreciate y'all listening. I appreciate my father joining me on the podcast today. Uh, but that brings us to the question of the week, which is, what is your favorite Christmas tradition and why? Put those in the comments below. Thank you all so much for listening. Please like, subscribe, share this video and podcast if it was helpful to you or insightful. Um, and I hope to see you all next week. Merry Christmas.